YNABers, my name is Jesse Meekum from YNAB. It stands for You Need a Budget. And this is another Whiteboard Wednesday. Today, and maybe for the next couple Wednesdays, I want to talk about accounting and kind of show you where we're coming from with some of the changes to the software and why, at the end of the day, the 4 rules, we know those, I repeat those all the time, but there is an underlying equation that YNAB has to adhere to make sure that everything stays sane. It hasn't always in the past, and it's gotten us into trouble. So there is no drawing up here yet. I'm actually going to draw as I go, dangerous as that might be. There was an Italian guy from several hundred years ago, like I think in the 15th century, that came up with double entry accounting. And the idea is that any assets you have must always equal any liabilities you have plus any equity that you have. So as one example, if you were to buy a house, you would borrow, let's say, $100,000. So your debt goes up by 100 grand. Whoops, I see this is already getting messed up because I'm having to draw as I go. Your debt goes up by 100 grand and your assets goes up by 100 grand because you just now have a house in your possession. And then let's say that the house goes up in value, the market's rising, and a year later the house is worth $110,000, so it goes up by another $10,000. Your equity in the house increased by $10,000. Let me just say, well, maybe I already had equity in the house when I bought it. Maybe originally, I got it for a deal. So you might say, or let me just erase this and start again. What if you found, you were savvy and found a deal with buying that house, procuring that asset, and you said, well, the house I bought is worth 100 grand. And I only had to borrow, let's say, or I had to borrow 80 grand of it, right? So you had a loan of 80 grand, and then you put in 20,000 of your own money, or no, let's say you put in 10,000 of your own money, just 10,000, right? So that does not equal $100,000, does not equal $90,000. So where is the other bit that you had? Well, you put in 10 grand and the house already had 10 grand of equity in it. So the 10 grand actually is from over here because you just gave up cash of $10,000. And those two together, 100 minus 10 is 90. You took out a loan for 80, plus there was 10 grand of equity already in the transaction when you bought the house. And you talk, all those real estate guys are always talking about equity that you're unlocking. Julie was watching Fixer Uppers and enjoying that quite a bit. And they always talk about you've got instant equity and things like that. That's that idea. So when you're talking about YNAB, the same idea applies. We want to make sure that we follow the cash. Now we keep the system pretty simple, and it's not actually double entry, but behind the scenes, we have all sorts of checks to make sure things balance. So sometimes in the release notes, which you can always see if you go down to the bottom of the website and click release notes, you can always see that we'll say things like, oh, we fixed this calculation error. And so we're constantly adding tests and adding scenarios and kind of what ifs to make sure that anything we release, those things always stay in balance. And what we're really keeping in balance is assets equals liability plus owner's equity. That is the equation. And that would make you an Accounting 100 student for sure. So if you think of this in light of, I just called it owner's equity because that's the actual accounting term, but just equity. In light of YNAB, and you add you add an account to it. And let's say that account has $100 because our assets went up by $100, right? And that's your equity. It's just your cash on hand. You didn't borrow money to get that $100, so you're right there. And then what happens if you spend some money, right? Just normal outflow that happens. So this would maybe go down. Maybe we spend $20 of that, so we're at 80. What about this? Is the equity that went down? It is. Part of owner's equity is the fact that your net income, and this is an accounting term, but your net income also would roll up into this. So owner's equity can be looked at as basically your income less your expenses. So as you earn more money, you get a paycheck plus 100. You get cash plus 100. The equation balances, 100 on this side, 100 on this side. If you spend $20 over here on the expense side, goes down 20, goes down 20. Everything balances. So every single thing that happens, it has to have this balancing effect. Now, in YNAB, when you actually record a transaction, you're just doing it from both sides. You're saying, hey, I had an expense of 20 and it hit the account and went down by 20. That's the key. What was happening with the old YNAB, YNAB 4, is in the liabilities part, we were treating credit, we were treating liabilities as if it was cash. So when the liability would increase, we would say that cash had gone out. And that throws this out of balance because cash didn't go out. So what we did, and this is why you see big changes with the new YNAB and how we handle credit cards. I know some of you haven't liked it. You say, well, no, to me, it's not debt. When I borrow money, it's not debt because I have the money to pay for it. And that's fine if you think of it that way. But the software can't think of it that way because we have to keep it in balance. So one more time, assets equals, what is it? Liabilities plus your equity, right? And let's say you're starting out again with $100 and you just earned it, right? So that's income, so it goes over here as part of equity. And then let's say that you spend some money and you do it on a card. No cash changes hands, and cash is an asset. No cash changes hands, so we don't even talk about this side of the equation. We just talk about this side. And we know we had an expense that we want to count against the budget. We want to show that groceries actually decreased by that $20. So we're going to go ahead and pull that out here. I do parentheses to show minus because that's the correct way to do it. So 100 minus the 20 of expense. Well, we can't keep the equation balanced by saying that cash left because cash didn't leave, so we aren't going to say minus 20 here. But what did happen? What happened was liabilities increased by 20, so we're going to do a plus 20 here. And the net effect is that those two things equal 0 and nothing happens on your asset side. And that's kind of the crux of the reasoning, right? That's the principle of it. And you can't argue with a guy that made it up in the 15th century, this guy from Italy. I wish I could remember his name. I should have looked it up. Anyway, look it up. Double entry accounting still works. And it holds true forever and ever and ever. And that is exactly the change we made to the new YNAB so that we can make sure to recognize that cash is king in our system. Cash is absolutely king. But we are making decisions based really on our expenses. So when you show that that minus 20, that $20 grocery thing went out, we want to show that it went out. So what we're doing is we're saying, well, the liability went up, and we're going to take that cash from here and stick it over in that credit card payment category. And that's exactly what we do now in YNAB. So you've got this $20, and instead of having the asset leave, right? The $20 isn't leaving, but we do remove it from the category, minus 20 from groceries, an expense, and we add it to payment, the credit card payment category. We're saying you now owe this liability, this credit card payment category, now increased by 20. We're keeping everything in balance. We didn't change cash, but we did show an expense while also recognizing that, hey, now you better make that payment. Okay, so you're liable for that payment. If you don't make the payment and you do something else with the cash, then cash will go down, right? Let's say you spend that money on something else. Cash will go down, another minus 20, you spend it somewhere else, and then cash goes down because actual cash left, and you're back at 80, okay? And then what do you got there? You got the same thing, you got 80. 100 minus 20 is 60 plus 20. Is 80, so you're still in balance. But you now only have $80 of cash and still have the $20 liability. Now, if we had decided, no, I want to pay that liability, I'm going to spend that $20, you're going to decrease your assets by 20, getting you to $80 in cash, while also decreasing your liability by 20, bringing it back down to 0, right? And so we have it balancing, minus 20 on this side, minus 20 on this side, and we end up with 80 still. And if you total this all up, these equal 0, this equals 80, and everything stays perfect. And this is why accounting is so important. And this is why this Whiteboard Wednesday is so long. Because what else could you expect on a Whiteboard Wednesday except a quick Accounting 100 lesson to show you why, when things balance, everything works out. And in this instance, what we're trying to do in the software is keep everything in balance. If we can't do that, we can't rely on our budget. And if we can't rely on our budget, we aren't making good spending decisions. And then why are we doing it all in the first place anyway? I can't promise you we're going to go to Accounting 200 and talk about bond amortization. If you guys want to, we can, or we could just do this, and then next week I'm going to show you one more thing specifically with credit cards around kind of the initial setup phase, because I think that's tripping people up. Anyway, I will talk to you guys next week. I know you're so excited. and maybe we'll just revisit this again. Maybe, if you're well behaved and if you're lucky. I'll see you next week.